Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Devin Klein-Corrigan. I'm the chair of the Warren Select Board, and I will be facilitating the meeting this evening. I'd just like to give you a run-through of our format, and we will be covering sort of 5 main topics. We're going to have about 20 minutes for each one of them. It'll include a couple of questions from me to our representatives and allow a little bit of time for public questions, after which around 7:40 we'll open it up for a general Q&A for anything that we haven't covered or if there are further questions about a topic. Does that sound all right with everyone? And when you ask a question, if you'd like to use a microphone, there's one on the pillow on the corner of the piano here. And so if you have a question germane to the topic we're discussing, please come to the pillow, stand and wait to ask your question. If you would rather stand up and be loud, please feel free to do so once I call upon you, and I'm happy to repeat the question if you need. So thank you to our representatives for being here. We have Representative Dara Torre. We have Ann Cummings in the middle as a senator from our area, and also Candice White as one of our representatives. And Theresa Wood from Waterbury will be joining us around 6:30, so we'll make an allowance for that. As a select board member, I would like to express my appreciation for the approved funding for a full-time attorney to staff the Ethics Commission. This is a vital step toward restoring the commission, which serves as an essential resource for municipalities navigating complex ethical concerns. Previously, the commission had been defunded to the point of being unable to provide support, an issue I discussed with both Candice and Dara this past year, and I'm grateful to see the funding reinstated. I'm going to allow a few minutes for each of our representatives to introduce themselves. So please, if you would, Candice.
Hi everybody, I'm Candice White. I live in Waitsfield, and I'm just finishing my first biennium, which I learned is the word that we use for a 2-year session in the legislature. I serve on the Transportation Committee, and I also am a member of several caucuses, the Rural Caucus, the Climate Caucus, and the Women's Caucus. And I also served this past session as an assistant majority leader of internal communications for the House Democrats. So I just wanted to note, we certainly have some challenges in Vermont, and I think we're making some good progress on those. But also, I just saw a study which my husband, who's an academic, shared with me within the last couple days, and there's a State of the Nation project, which is, and they've come out with a report on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the country. And it was done by a bipartisan group of university professors and think tank members and overseen by Tulane University. And they analyzed all 50 states on topics from citizenship and democracy, environment, satisfaction, education, a number of criteria. And Vermont comes in number 4 out of all the 50 states. So we're only behind Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Iowa. So I just want to kind of big picture, we've got a pretty good story here in Vermont. We know we have challenges and we're working on those, but big picture, things are pretty good here. So I just wanted to take a step back and kind of celebrate that. My Transportation Committee, the House Transportation Committee, is a tripartisan committee. We have a Republican chair, and we have members of all different parties, and we only work on 2 bills during a session. And both of our bills, the Transportation Bill and the Department of Motor Vehicles Bill, came out of our committees as a unanimous vote. And so I think that I just also wanted to share that because I think that is an example of we can be collaborative in the legislature, and I feel like our committee really was. And I think that's a positive thing to share. So I'll probably talk a little bit more when Devin asks some questions about transportation. I also pay close attention to education, healthcare, and the environment. Senator Andy Perchlik, who is one of our senators, had a family obligation, and he sends his regrets for, he's sorry he can't be here tonight. And one other housekeeping item, end of session reports. These are, Dara and I put one of these together, just front and back, just kind of like details on some of the most important legislation we think we worked on this past session. So there are copies in the rear of the theater, and we will also be leaving them at the different town halls throughout our district. So thank you.
Hi, and thank you for coming out this evening. I understand there's several other things you could do in the Valley tonight. I'm Ann Cummings. I live in Montpelier. I'm the senior senator. And I've been there, I think, around 30 years. It makes me the dean of the Senate, which means I just don't know when to go home. But I stay because I love my job. I see my job as making democracy work for people. And in Vermont, it is working. I think this was a year where democracy did work in a couple of areas. When we started out, the governor and the state of the state said, you will do Act 73 as you wrote it, or I will veto everything. And he has done that before. We had done Act 181, I think it was 2 years ago, because I was on the Economic Development Committee when we did that bill. Sounded like a good idea at the time, but then the people spoke. The governor, to his credit, backed down, and we have a much more modified school bill than we did a year ago, much softer, kind of more gradual moving in, and we removed the most offensive parts of 181. It really was started out as a way to help develop more housing in areas where it was appropriate, but then people started drawing lines on maps and the reality hit, and so we're back to square one, except the sections about easier to build housing. So I think it was good for democracy this year. It is alive in Vermont. You're here. And unless something goes strangely wrong, which it hasn't in Vermont, this is going to be a productive discussion. It was last year, even though the feelings about school changes were very high. Vermont has those emotional, strong feeling discussions, but we keep it civil, we're able to talk, and that means we're able to make progress, and that to me is what I'm there to do. So thank you for letting me do it.
Hi everyone, I'm Dara, Torre, and I live in Moortown. This is my second term, and I serve on the Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee, which is a newly constituted committee with the realization that our IT projects in the state are really big and complicated and expensive, and that we didn't have a proper home to manage that. So it's been a lot of learning for me because I don't have a background in that. And also a lot of learning because the energy sector is extremely complicated and really important. The foundation of our economy, its role in the climate, rising costs affecting Vermonters. So we did work on a number of bills, including the data center bill that we'll be talking about tonight. Unfortunately, not a lot of what we worked on, even though it was unanimous, a lot of it, didn't actually make it out alive. And that's just something that happens sometimes. Some of our bills, we had some great collaboration and compromise, and others just didn't end up that way, even though they were, popular on the floor of the House and in the Senate. One of my takeaways from this second term, having been involved my first term in some of these really big policies like Act 181, which was reforming our statewide land use regulation and trying to ramp up our planning so that we have less conflict when it comes to building, and changing the designation program. So that was a really big effort that I got to work on when I was on the Environment and Energy Committee. And then this year, experiencing, the real disruption as people got very concerned about what it would mean for our working lands and our smaller communities, frankly. So I really learned about the power of democracy and the voice of the public really helping us shape policy, and that it changes over time and needs to be iterative sometimes. But also that implementation really matters, and we have some control over implementation in doing thoughtful planning to begin with our policies, but we're not the people who execute things, and our state is under some duress right now. It was really apparent to me that state employees are pretty stressed out. They had the back to office order before we got started, and there's a lot on their plates, and every time we have new bills, there's more work, more reports. And so this was a real experience for me of learning how to set expectations and be a little more thoughtful about the whole picture, not just the policy and the integrity of the policy, but how it's going to actually land, what the capacity to do it is. So there's a lot more learning there, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to discuss tonight.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. A couple of things that you mentioned I just want to highlight here. Yes, please, keep it civil. I know we usually do, and I just want to remind us that we're all friends and we should disagree. It's important that we disagree and that we listen to one another, and hopefully we change some minds. Also, we have a lot to cover, so when you speak, please be concise and thoughtful about the time. All right, we're going to jump right into education, school reform, and property taxes. So two threads run together here. H955 continues the Act 73 education overhaul. It creates 7 mandatory regional cooperative education service areas, or CESAs. Is that how we're saying it? CESAs. So districts can share services like special education and business administration. And it funds 7 facilitators to run merger study committees that explore school district consolidation. A new statewide funding formula is also set to take effect in fiscal year 2030. Separately, H949, the annual yield bill, sets next year's education property tax rates. This year it became the center of a debate over how much one-time surplus to spend now to hold tax rates down versus reserve for next year. The House version landed near a 7% average increase, the Senate near 3.8%. What was the final figure? Does anyone know?
I think that's it.
3.8?
I think it was the 3.8. I mean, Anne, you were on that
It's under.
conference committee.
Let's see. The Senate did a 1 year also help for renters rebate. We increased that because property taxes are driving up rents. So I think it came in at, I believe 3.8 was the number. It's under 4.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. Property taxes and school reform are 2 of the things people feel most directly. What will households around here actually see on their tax bills next year, and why?
Okay. I forgot to add when I was talking that I chair finance and we do taxes. And last year I got to do most of the talking, and this year I've been happy not to. What you're going to see on your tax bill is pretty much what you saw on your tax bill last year, increased by your spending. We put, as we have for the last 2 years, $100 million of surplus general fund money. We transferred it over and used it to buy down the property tax. So you will see that decrease, but it's really less of an increase because school spending increased this year. So you're not going to see much of a change. The big change will come in 2030 when we go to a foundation formula, which is what 48 other states use. And basically, the state there's all kinds of federal or, national experts, but on data-driven, I also am on health and welfare. We love data-driven. But the state will set the amount of money per student that every school will get. And then there's weights. The original proposal, and I haven't heard anything different, is that the state would be picking up all the cost of transportation. It's now at 50%. And and the cost of special ed is still being worked on. So as this concept moves forward, when it came out last year from the governor, they were literally writing it overnight and presenting it to us in the morning. As we've worked through, as we've listened to people, we keep putting a little more meat on the bone. So right now, what we're doing will have we'll buy down your property tax by $100 million, but I doubt you're gonna notice that too much. We are moving to a foundation formula, and I had one other thought I wanted to share with you. But, we are moving to a second homes tax. That will go into effect in 2028 tax year, which starts a year from now, July 1st. And right now, your local listers are in the process of identifying what is a second home. It is a year-round, not a primary residence. And when that tax goes into effect, the plan as it stands, right now, if you're of a certain income, you get a rebate from the state. You only can, if you're under $90,000 in income, you can only spend X percent of your income on your property taxes. The problem with that system is this is a closed system. So if you don't pay $1,000 of the taxes that you technically owe because of the income sensitivity, everybody else has to pick up that bill. What that means is the property tax rate gets raised to cover that cost. The plan is the second home tax will cover that cost. And there will be another system based on your income plus a certain amount of your property value will be excluded from taxes based on your income. But because the second home tax will cover that, in theory, we won't know until we get the actual numbers, it should lower everybody's property taxes in and of itself. So that you may see by next year more of an impact. But then 2 years out from there, once all the discussions go, you should see another change in your property tax bill.
Thank you, Ed. Candice, yes?
I just want to add a couple of things. So just on the property tax buy down, I just wanted to clarify. So the House voted to do that over 2 years. Both the Senate and the governor felt strongly to do it all 1 year. So it's happening all this year, that $109 million, I want to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure the final is
Yeah.
100 million.
Yeah.
Plus or minus.
So, and just heads up, when we do a buy down, we're facing that next year. It just kind of, it creates a bigger cliff. So we will have a challenging situation next year. And as the senator said, 2030 is the date for when the foundation formula will go into effect. That's when the state will then say, here's the amount of money we are spending on education across the state. and then dole it out to schools based on a per pupil cost, and then the weights on top of that.
Candice, quick point of clarification there. Is that also the year that the transportation costs will be transferred out of education spending? When is that happening?
So that is actually starting to happen this year.
Okay.
We have the transportation fund, about a third of the purchase and use tax on new cars goes to the education fund, about $50 or $60 million right now. This year, in 2027, we're pulling 10 million of that back, so basically keeping it in transportation and not sending it to education. And that is so that we can take that 10 million and put it in a special pot so it's matched by federal dollars, 90% federal dollars. That's to expand our paving, because we were behind last year, and we recognize that that's a big problem across the state. So that answers
does that pertain to the cost of busing children?
No.
No?
No,
Okay.
kind of a different bucket.
Okay.
and
I
I
want us
can
to,
build-
just if we could, 1 second, introduce Theresa Wood. Thank you for coming, and I'm sorry that we started without you.
Oh, no, I knew I couldn't be here right at 6, so thank you.
Yes, of course. We're just in the middle of discussing education and property tax reform. Please jump in when you feel like you'd like to. And after we conclude this section, I'd love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, if that's all right. Okay. We have another question here, if we could, and I want to give the room an opportunity to ask some questions. So the other piece that we sort of laid the groundwork for here are the CISAs. And so on consolidation, what does the CISA structure and the merger study process mean for a small rural district like ours over the next few years? And will it realize cost savings?
I'll speak to that, just since I haven't spoken yet. And just quickly to the previous question, because there's going to be this gap before the foundation formula, in the yield bill, we did add the excess spending threshold, which is going to try to help our districts really lean hard on spending, so that in the absence of any buy down, we don't see, we try to maintain and have limited increases in property taxes. So on the CISAs, I think that they've been very successful in other rural states. It's the sharing of professional development, special education, even thinking about transportation, all kinds of ways that geographically co-located districts may be able to leverage and have some savings out of it. So it's happening already in the south of Vermont, and they've already saved money in the first year. So I think it's very promising, because our district, unfortunately, is one of the districts that is going to be really under pressure from that excess spending threshold change. So we're going to be looking at anything we can do to try to keep the quality of our school during this transition.
Can we
Explain that a little bit,
The excess spending threshold?
just whatever you just.
Sure. So the excess spending threshold was in practice for a long time, but it was rolled back during COVID and then reinstituted. And then in this legislation this year, the percentage you could spend above was proposed to be lowered. So we ended up at an in-between compromise on the first year,
Yeah.
from 118% to
112?
115 and a half, I
115
think.
and a half, yeah.
For this first, not this coming fiscal year, but the following fiscal year. So for our district, it means, I think, something like $650,000 less in spending. And if you exceed the threshold, then you're double taxed. So it's a really strong
Yeah.
disincentive to spend above it.
Do we have any questions from the public? Yes, please. There's a microphone over here on the pillow, and I think we have time for maybe 2, and then we can save some for the open Q&A. Please, John.
The name's John Donaldson. I learned a long time ago it's not fair to shoot the messengers. So I won't do that, especially the messengers that haven't been messengers for very long.
I got your back.
Okay, so Freddie's going to shoot the messenger. So here's my concern about all this talk about education. I don't believe it. I think you all are relying on this foundation formula to be the savior, and we're going to get there 3 or 4 years from now. We're going to find out that people's tax bills really don't go down very much because the legislature and the governor are not looking at the main drivers of our education cost in any meaningful way. It's teacher salaries and it's healthcare. And the local school districts like ours are going to get screwed by this foundation formula because there's going to be a huge limit on what we can spend. So I would like to understand how this is coming together, number one. Number two, do you have any numbers to back up your belief that the foundation formula is going to lower people's tax bill, and by how much? Is it just peanuts or is it something meaningful? Thank you.
Thank you, John.
We won't know till we get there. And I think, as you saw this year, this is a work in progress. What we do know is that we have one of the highest per pupil spending in the country, that all our educational indicators are not going in the right direction. Our high school graduation rate, which used to be amongst the highest, is now down to about 25. Our continuation rate to any kind of further training has always been low. We know that in Washington County, we're a fairly wealthy county, and your kids here are probably getting a good education. But we have schools. I have one here. I have a member of my family who is going to Norwich on, I think it's dual enrollment next year, because he's maxed out all the education, all the math classes that his school can provide him. And so and that's his field of study and expertise. So we have that program, but not every child is able to take care of it. There will be new educational standards coming in along with this. There will be a statewide high school education standard. Right now, we do not have a statewide standard as to how many classes and what kind. And we reached the point where we've had at least one valedictorian who gets a free green and gold scholarship to UVM that couldn't accept it because she didn't have the classes necessary to get in. We knew, how long ago was Act 46? 15 years ago, that the potential for another lawsuit on the Brigham based on unequal opportunity, because right now, it's easier for towns with economic wealth amongst its citizens to spend that extra penny on their tax rate than it is for poorer towns. And so students in poorer towns are not getting the same quality or just opportunity. The classes aren't there for them to take. The base problem we're trying to deal with is that we have lost significant numbers of students, and we have not adjusted our structure. My story is, back in its heyday, probably the 1970s, my street, which is a small little horseshoe, had its own school bus. There were 67 kids on that street. I can't count 10 kids on that street right now, but we are still running the same education structure. And that's the reality we're trying to deal with. We've done a lot better in doing teachers' salaries. The state doesn't set those. Healthcare is a cost for everyone. We did reference-based pricing this year, and I'll let Theresa talk more about that. And we targeted the teachers' health care to benefit from that, and the governor vetoed it, saying he wanted it spread out over everyone. We have made several changes that have, I don't think they actually reduced it. They made, one was infusion drugs and setting a cap. We've done a couple things that have lowered that. We understand that the cost of health care, or health insurance, which is health care, is a major issue. But it's a major issue for everyone, and we are dealing with that. We don't set teachers' salaries, and teachers do have a very good health care plan right now in comparison to other people. So that's a good thing. It also, all school staff have access to that excellent health insurance plan. That's a good thing, but it's an expensive thing, and we don't want to take it away, but we need to find a way. I think we know that we need to increase at some level the class sizes. We can't afford to pay a teacher a living wage and good benefits to teach a class of 6 kids. The numbers don't work. And so we're trying to find a way to get to the numbers that will work, so that the people that taught in our schools, that built our communities, can afford to retire and stay here. And that so the students that we graduate can afford to live here. Because everything is great in Vermont, except it is one of the most expensive states to live in. And so that's the balance we're trying to find.
Yeah, and I think what you just alluded to is the funding of the 7 facilitators to run these merger study groups in hopes of creating some more efficiency within the school systems, which I think is one of the leading factors to one of the hopeful drivers to bring costs down. I want to make sure Freddie has an opportunity to ask her question before we move on to our next topic. Candice, do you have something quick to add?
I'm glad. I just wanted to mention what you just did, Devin, about these facilitators in the 7 CISA districts. All schools are required to participate in these merger discussions. They're not mandating mergers, but every CISA district will have to have a discussion about potential mergers. Any mergers that are discussed and that want to move forward will be voted on in the 2028 town meeting. I think with schools knowing that a foundation formula is on the horizon and knowing what it is, and it's about 15,000 something right now, and there's still some study going into that, but knowing what that amount of money is per student and knowing that they've got a couple years to get there, I think the idea is that these schools are going to see changes that they need to make so that they can actually afford their school system. So that is cost savings, or the idea for that. And the other thing that the senator was mentioning is, we've had several pieces of healthcare legislation which have significantly lowered the cost of healthcare in this state. And the reference-based pricing that it was going to look at or address teacher healthcare and the Vermonters who are paying the highest healthcare premiums right now because they lost those federal premium credits. Those were the 2 groups that we had legislated to start reference-based pricing. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that, but I think we have to go in that reference-based pricing down that road too for healthcare savings.
Thank you, Candice. Freddie, please.
Freddie Graves from Facein, and mine is a multi-pronged question statement. One was the second home tax.
Freddie.
Will it be for
Freddie.
each? Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
For each town's second homes will offset their taxes, or is this going into the state pot? Is SPED actually going to get paid by the state? the original foundation formula, the problem that made it so expensive is you guys weren't paying the bills like you were supposed to. And we were stuck.
Sorry, Freddie, could you just say that one more time? I'm not sure I understood that.
When we had the foundation formula prior to the Brigham decision,
Yeah.
people complained and taxes were rising, certainly not like they are now, but the state wasn't paying the SPED taxes or the SPED money to the schools that they were committed to pay.
The special education funding? Is that-
Special ed, sorry.
That's okay.
And
you.
oftentimes construction money that was promised didn't come either. Let's see. Our town, or our district, will have to pay reduced spending by $400,000 to $600,000 to stay level. When I was on the board, I tried to get zero-based budgeting, which is what any business would do, and we can't get the schools to do that. I mean, that seems like a place to start. And then these Cessna things, or whatever they're called. Cessna,
Not the plane.
Cessna, whatever. It's all a plane that somebody's flying and nobody knows where it's going. But we used to do that in this district. All the different schools, we shared resources without the state getting involved and having oversight, and it cost a whole lot less. And every step that the state has made, 60, 68, 46, 73, you cost us more money. And our performance has gone down. Shame on you.
Thank you, Freddie.
I mean, I'll
I'd
just
like to give, yeah, please.
start to say that I can't speak to what the legislature did in the 1990s. It was a while ago.
Oh, it was the 70s,
Okay, so,
80s.
but on Freddie's question about the second home tax, I mean, that tax rate, I think last year in Act 73, the education bill last year split the homestead and non-homestead tax rates so the non-homestead is in now several different categories. So you've got non-homestead, non-residential, you've got non-homestead, residential, and is there a third?
No, that's it. And then there's homestead, residential.
And as far as I know, and Senator, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but that money is not staying in the towns. It's all going. It's just a change in the state tax policy structure.
So we resort towns are getting hammered for.
Like $3 too.
So,
Right now, I understand that the tax department, thank you, is doing a study to actually identify all the second homes in the state. I don't think we have an actual number. I've heard it's as high as 40%, but they're working on identifying those properties.
I think Freddie's question was specifically, would the taxation on second homes be applied per district, or would it be put into a state pot and redistributed?
The Brigham decision requires that the state
Redistribute the funds.
redistribute, that you can't, it was ruled inequitable that towns, and I know the Valley was one, now Stowe is in my district, that you have the property wealth, you have the second homes, and they don't send kids to your schools, and you had very low tax rates. I think it was in the 20 cent, 28, 30 cents, somewhere in there when we did Act 60. The same time we had Standard that had a $3.26 tax rate, and they couldn't afford art, music, or anything. And that was the inequity, because the property wealth of the community determined the access to education of the child. And Brigham said, you can't do that. So we are different than I think most other states. We have the Brigham decision. It's the Supreme Court. Until the Supreme Court changes, we have to live under that. So it will go in to a pot and it will be delivered out. But if we can get school spending at an affordable rate, then it should help the town, all towns. And that's the goal.
I think there are two pieces of that are challenging for towns such as ours. And I don't need an answer to this, but I just like us to sort of think about this. One, we've seen that the redistribution of funds, while in theory is equitable and a really good idea, sometimes throwing money at a problem doesn't solve it. And we have communities in Vermont that no matter how much money you put into a school system, without the community supporting children's access to education and the desire to succeed, they will not succeed en masse. That's one. And two, the cost of living in Vermont in general is high, but it also varies by district. And it is more expensive to live in the more expensive districts, the ones that have the property wealth. So by taking disproportionate amount of money out of it and not giving any proportion of that back means our teachers can't afford to live here, right? So I think that's some of the intricacies of what we're dealing with. And I when I think about this problem, I often wonder, can we start thinking about this differently? Can we maybe shift the conversation away from the per pupil spending and think more about creating access to opportunity in different ways? So I think I'd like to close on education for now, and we'll come back to sort of healthcare, which is germane to this as well, and move on. And please, if anyone else has more questions about this, we'll have some Q&A at the end. Anne, would you, or sorry, Theresa, would you please introduce yourself to the group for a few minutes?
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Theresa Wood. I am the chair of the House Human Services Committee. I just finished my 11th year in the legislature. I serve the Washington-Chittenden district, so we share a school district with the other representatives here. And I also serve and have in my district Mount Mansfield Union High School, which also is, undergoing some of the same issues that we're talking about, that you've just finished talking about here. I live in Waterbury, and I don't know if we have any folks from Waterbury here, but if you do, hey, and if you don't, that's good too. But I just want to make just a couple of broad comments about the education, if I could, just to react a little bit. I think that what is difficult for us to come to grips with is that, and somebody referenced this, maybe it was Freddie, right now, we need to think about our school system, our education system, as a business of educating students, but it's also a business of needing to make ends meet. We're not interested in making a profit, but we are interested in being able to afford what it is that we have to deliver. And right now, that is a serious question for us. And I think that we have all seen our property taxes rise to the point where they're becoming untenable for people. And even with property tax assistance, that our property tax system, believe it or not, is considered to be relatively progressive. It is still unaffordable for so many people. And actions like the governor took in vetoing H-190, which would have had a direct impact on the cost of education across the state, are, in my opinion, extremely bad decisions. And really that was going to introduce, as the senator said, reference-based pricing just a year earlier, okay? Just 1 year earlier, to be targeted to those two populations that Representative White just spoke about, which was the education, health insurance, and the folks who had lost their subsidies through the federal program. And that alone was going to save millions of dollars for Vermonters. And he vetoed that bill. It's something that I find, honestly, I really can't wrap my head around it. So we have those kinds of issues to deal with. And all of us received emails from folks on the school board and from our superintendent and from some community members about the excess spending threshold that was actually had passed the Senate at 112%, and everybody was going wild about that. And I think it was a strategic move on the part of the Senate to get the House to think about this in a different way than we were. And I think it is important, and this is what I responded back to those people who wrote me emails about this. Our district needs to figure out how we are going to move to the level of what the foundation formula is going to be. And yes, that means tamping back, and they have in the last couple of years, tamped back what it is that we're spending. And I think that we are beyond the point now in our school district here of cutting around the edges. You know, the class sizes, the number of schools that we have, what we're going to do with the other school districts that we are talking about in our CISA district. Those are all things that we have to think about how we are restructuring education in the state, not just nipping around the edges, because nipping around the edges is just going to result in sort of the continual, you know, decline of what class offerings are and things like that. And that's not really what we want to see. We have to think about education differently, and those are the kinds of things we need to challenge our school leaders to be thinking about. I served on a school board for 12 years, was chair for most of that time, so I have an understanding of how difficult it is to go through this. I've merged 2 school districts together and built a new middle school and renovated an elementary school. So you know, I know that people can think outside the boxes, and sometimes out of adversity you get some of the most creative ideas, and I am really hopeful that that is what's going to happen here. But it is going to take some outside the box thinking, and it means that we are going to have to think about things in a different way than what we are doing right now. And
I think that's an excellent point, outside the box. We love thinking outside the box. Hopefully, the state government allows us to do so. All right. Because this has been such a hot topic within education, I'm going to rearrange here a little bit, and I'd like to move on to healthcare. So we've got a number of bills that passed and some that didn't. S-189 sets required procedures for when a hospital plans to close an essential service line, written partly in response to several poorly handled closures, including the loss of primary care in Waitsfield. H577 creates the Array RX prescription savings card, a free card offering low-cost, generic, and name brand drugs to people with a Vermont address. S197, aimed at creating universal primary care, I understand was passed by the governor on June 18th. And S190, which Theresa just mentioned, would have begun reference-based pricing to cap what hospitals can charge for certain services for exchange and school employee health plans. It was vetoed by the governor. So Waitsfield lost primary care, and S189 came partly out of that. What protection do communities have now when a hospital wants to cut a service that we didn't have before?
I'll start off. I think the first thing that I think it's important for people to know is how much your representatives who are representing you in the State House advocated on your behalf for the town of Waitsfield and the Valley in general. Pardon me? Oh, closer? Sorry.
I think you have to talk, I was
right into
directly
it.
into
Okay,
it.
kiss the microphone.
Thanks, Liz.
So I just wanted to say that both Representative Torre and Representative White advocated intensely around this issue, both during the session and before the session. And I'm sure that Senator Cummings did as well. I think that unfortunately, a lot of the healthcare system, like any system, is built on people and it's built on relationships. And I will say that the head of the University of Vermont Medical Center is now a Vermont born and raised individual who has deep connections to Vermont and understands, this is Dr. Stephen Leffler, understands that the UVM Medical Center is a community hospital that is affiliated with the whole state of Vermont and Upper New York, and he understands that role. The the problem is that you can't build a system only based on personalities. And so hence why we passed that legislation that needed to involve the community in these discussions around major changes in offerings in local communities. So, it is our hope that through this and through the change in leadership that there is at UVM, that we will see more community involvement. And I'm sure that people have seen in the news the 142 positions that are being laid off there. The hospitals around the state are needing to reimagine themselves as well and how they do business. So, we experienced similar upset and outrage at Copley in Morrisville when they had to make the decision to close their birthing center. Hospitals are businesses as well, and the board of directors made that decision based upon the economics and the location of other equally qualified birthing services for the families in their service area. It's we're really at a tipping point around not just education but around healthcare as well. And if we don't change how we're doing some things, then we're going to see fewer community hospitals, and that's not what we want to see. But we may see specialization of certain hospitals doing certain things. So, I think people are pretty familiar with the fact that Copley is known for its orthopedics. We are working with Gifford. They're very in tune with services for older Vermonters and what the population of older Vermonters needs in terms of ongoing services. So it is really important for community members to speak up. The Valley really spoke up and made their anxiety and anger heard, and it's one of the reasons that we have that bill. So thank you folks for representing.
Does someone else want to comment on that? Can I move on to the next?
I think we can move on.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Act 173, S 197, is intended to create universal primary care and could help alleviate some serious healthcare concerns for middle-income Vermonters. Can you explain how this would be funded and realized?
I could
Please.
take a stab at it just because I have it right in front of me. So one of the things we learned in our crisis here in Waitsfield is that primary care is a loss leader. So what S197 does is try to rectify that. And one of the ways is to make the commercial insurers adequately reimburse, make payments that are at least equal to Medicaid. So that is going to start in 2027, which is a good thing. And then
Sorry, wait, Dara, before you go on, are you suggesting that Act 173 requires healthcare providers like Blue Cross Blue Shield to pay the actual Medicaid set rates for primary care?
Yeah.
So it isn't actually universal primary care because if you don't have health care.
That's another part of the bill.
Okay.
So the bill is trying to set the stage for that. So I think there's a study about universal health primary care that's included in this bill. But before that even, it's just trying to get proper reimbursement to happen. So there's spending targets and other payment reform, and it's an expansion of our blueprint for health, which is a system of care in the state. And then looking at this potential model of universal primary care.
Okay. Yes, please, questions from the audience
Hello,
with
my
respect
name is
to
Ben
healthcare.
Bridgewater from Facein. One question I have is you say you lowered the health care for our teachers. What are you doing to get more providers or health insurance companies into the state so that we have competition so that brings down health care? Mm-hmm. We have 2 providers in this state. We lost 30. How do we get them back? And where the competition comes in so we can all lower our health care here. Thank you.
Okay, and Theresa, I'm going to look to you to this. I know there was discussions. We lost think it was my first year, we did community rating. So, long time ago, and I'm pulling on my memory. But before we did community rating, which basically says when you set your insurance rates, you have to do it on the cost of the entire community. Old, young, sick, well, athletes, smokers, you name it. You take the whole group, because we are a very small insurance pool. And insurance is based on a pool. Everybody pays in, you all pay in on your homeowner's insurance, but very few of us will ever draw that money back out, because very few of us, thank God, will not have their homes burned down or have somebody get seriously injured. And so there's a lot of people paying in and not that much going out. Healthcare is different. Most of us will draw out, and will draw out significantly at some point. And we are a small pool. Before we did community rating, if you were a 22-year-old football, former high school athlete, you could get very cheap rates. My son got health insurance for a year when he got out of high school, so he could do his gap year. And, it was like $300. The backside of that is that when you hit 40, 50, name a date, and you started to need health insurance, your rates went way up, because your pool of 50 to 65-year-olds cost a lot more. So when you needed it, you couldn't afford it. Community rating says you take all those young, healthy people and all us old, sick people, and you put us together, and it kind of flattens that rate out. Well, a lot of insurance companies made their money on offering those cheaper rates to low-risk pools. They all left. And we had a safety net at one point to pick up the folks that got disadvantaged. We had a discussion this year, I don't know if it was in health and welfare or in another one, but the chance that we are going to get another major insurance company in here just because of the economics. We're old. We are the second oldest. I don't know, do we go up and
We go back
down
and
with
forth,
Maine?
yeah.
Are we the oldest now?
No, I think we're about third right now.
We're third now. Okay, we're doing better. We're old, which means we're high risk. And so and we regulate our insurance industry fairly well. So it is protection for you, but it comes at a cost.
But how are you able to reduce it for the teachers and not for the people who are paying the teachers?
Okay,
Can I just, so I'm just going to be succinct about that. So it actually, what we did last year, reduced it for everybody. The major thing that had an impact was we had some hospitals who were, what I would say, well, I'll just be generous, overcharging the public and the insurance companies for their injectable drugs. Think about cancer treatments, think about people with autoimmune diseases, think about people who need IV drugs, whether they go to the hospital to get them or you get them an outpatient. Some as much as 2,000% above what it costs them. Okay, so we put a limit on what they can charge insurance companies. I'm not sure if everybody saw in the news in the last 12 months, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the state's largest insurer. We talk about trying to attract other insurance companies. I'll just be blunt. That's not going to happen with the pool that we have and the demographics of our state, unless somehow we're able to join a regional pool of some sort. But Blue Cross Blue Shield, our Department of Financial Regulation had put them on on notice, essentially, that they were at risk. And what does that mean? That means that their reserves had fallen so low because they had lost continued year-over-year losses that they were at considered a high risk for essentially what we would call bankruptcy here, because their reserves had reached such a low point for their outstanding payables. And so we took immediate steps last year to lower the cost of drug prices that are being used by hospitals. That affected everybody, not just teachers, not just people on the health exchange. That affected everybody who has insurance in the state of Vermont, whether you were on Medicaid, whether you were, had Blue Cross Blue Shield or MVP or Medicare, for instance, as well. So it was only this year in the bill that the governor vetoed that we were trying to target some savings, and that was just 1 year until it went into effect for everybody, and the governor vetoed that bill. So we haven't done anything that has passed that actually targeted a specific population of individuals. The action that we took last year benefited everybody. And Blue Cross Blue Shield, I mean, for instance, if you talk to school board members, they will tell you that the rate of increase that they experienced was lowered by between 4 and 5% because of the action that we took last year to limit what hospitals can upcharge for these drugs.
And we're seeing similarities between education and healthcare. We have a system that was set up for one set of reality, and the reality has changed. We had, I think we still have, the University of Vermont Medical Center was one of the highest priced, if not the highest priced hospital in the country. And since we are the highest priced in the world, that means that it is one of the highest priced hospitals in the world. It's a good hospital, but it's probably not that good. On the other hand, all the rest of our hospitals are in various stages of financial distress. Their numbers are all either in the red or slightly pink. UVMC is the only place that's, including CVH, they're all part of the network. They are in the black, but by national standards, they are in the lowest section of black. They barely make it in to being financially stable. We have done the Green Mountain Care Board, and there's been a lot of meetings and 8 a.m.s and noons and working with the Green Mountain Care Board to get a handle on that cost. We put Mike Smith in as kind of a watchdog, and they've worked. You've heard the layoffs, and these are not medical staff that's getting laid off. This is administrative staff. They are right now working to get their costs down. So we're trying, reference-based pricing says you can only charge 110% or a percentage of what Medicare pays. If we do that too quickly, we could put a significant number of our hospitals out of business. And so we're trying to walk that thin line that keeps hospitals open and solvent, and we've already had one go into bankruptcy, which we got out, Springfield. We're trying to do that to get the prices down, but as in education, the system was set up for a very different way of providing health care. And so they need to make some significant structural changes in order to make things affordable in this day and age. And
So, and that sounds like sort of the rationale behind the vetoing of S-190. Is that what I'm understanding? That if it were done too quickly, it could drive our hospitals into bankruptcy?
I I don't think so. I didn't get the veto letter.
Yeah, the veto letter essentially said you should apply these savings to everybody, not just to these two groups of individuals. That's what the governor
Right.
put in his veto letter.
And that essentially would have been the small group, which is small businesses, I think is the group he was targeting. But if you spread it out, you probably won't notice the difference in your property tax bill this year, despite everything we've done. If you spread it out to everybody, nobody will notice the difference. So we were trying to impact the areas that, we keep being told, well, it's health insurance that's driving education, so we were trying to fix that problem.
So if using reference-based pricing isn't on the table now,
It is.
it'll come back around?
Oh, yeah.
It's there. It's already been passed. It's just this was trying to 190 was trying to implement it sooner for a certain group of people.
Okay.
So reference-based pricing comes into effect in 2028. That's already been passed.
Oh, great. And so we're giving hospitals some time
To
to
adjust their
restructure
spending.
in
Exactly.
hopes of not going bankrupt. That's great. And it sounds like you're hopeful for some significant affordability achievements through that system. Is that right?
I think that it makes me anxious. I'll just be honest about it.
Yeah.
Tying ourselves to Medicare makes me anxious because I will tell you that home health agencies are primarily funded via Medicare, and they are. It's it seems stable to us, out here in community land, but for providers, it's a very volatile funding source. And so, I'm anxious about tying our kite to the Medicare, I guess we're the string on the kite, but it is what a number of other states have done. The state auditor has done a lot of research on this and has recommended this for the last several years. And I think that, we can't just pretend that we don't need to do anything. So, it is the most researched method that we have available to us. But does it make some of us anxious? Yeah, it does.
And
Thank you for
it
your
doesn't
candor.
touch the other, we can talk
Other
about.
services.
Well, the big one is pharmaceuticals. I mean, people.
But you've done something about that. Array RX.
Yeah, Array RX, and I will tell you, my husband gets a blood thinner, and his cardiologist, when he went to the pharmacy and found out the price, which was like $300 for 3 months, he said, oh no, I will send your prescription to Canada Pharmacy online through Canada. That $300 prescription costs $36 that included shipping from Mauritania for 3 months. It's gone up with tariffs. There's another tariff increasing, and they put him on a new med. It was $89, I think. On the Array RX, since I had just ordered this new med online, I looked it up. The best number we could get here was $181. There's 3 pharmacies, all the big ones. 2 of them were $398. So even the best price we can get here is double. And it's all the same drugs. It's all being manufactured. The pharmaceutical companies in this country really have us between a rock and a hard place. And we've had very little, having tried for several years, ability to get a handle on that.
Yeah, I think that has to come from the federal level. Yeah.
Devin, can I just make a couple comments? So just back to reference-based pricing, all the hospital administrators, executives who I've spoken to in the state of Vermont believe that reference-based pricing is essential to get our healthcare costs under control. So I just want to put that out there. And one of the benefits of reference-based pricing is that there is continuity in the cost of of procedures across the state. So, because right now we have situations where one community hospital may be charging $1,500 for, say, a knee replacement, whereas UVM may be charging $5,000. Like, there's huge discrepancies right now, and people don't, like, we're often not shopping around for our knee replacement or whatever, so you could kind of assume that this type of price changes, that it's not happening, but it is. So that'll be one of the benefits of reference-based pricing. And just on the ARA-RX pharmaceutical plan, you know, that is a nonprofit consortium. We are joining with a number of other states, and it is bringing significant savings to people in other states, up to 80% savings on generic drugs, up to 20% savings on brand name drugs. Anybody with a Vermont address can get their prescriptions online through this ARA-RX, and through your pharmacy. And you can use your, it goes toward your deductible. So that should deliver some significant savings for people who are relying on.
Does that cover for Medicare people?
Is for everybody.
Anyone that has a Vermont.
Everybody with a Vermont address.
I think you also just said something really important, Candice, that it is, it can be applied to the deductible, because prior to that, GoodRx, all of the other prescription coupons made it ineligible to be part of your deductible. And so that's a really good point.
And I just want to say, the treasurer, Mike Pichek, this was his proposal to the legislature, which we followed up on, but just to give him credit for that.
Shout out. We have a lot to cover still, so I'm going to stop us here, and we're going to move on to civil rights and immigration, but please save your questions for the end. So we've got several bills that responded to federal immigration enforcement in Vermont. S209 limits warrantless immigration arrests at sensitive locations such as courts, schools, hospitals, libraries, and government buildings. H849, the Constitutional Accountability Act, lets people sue federal agents for violating their state constitutional rights. S227 sets protections and protocols for students facing immigration enforcement at school. Those are all bills that passed. What didn't pass was S208, which would have barred law enforcement, including ICE, from concealing their identity by masking and required proper identification. House Republicans used a procedural move, I understand, to block the final vote on the last day of the session. So, with these bills, Vermont has passed some of the furthest reaching state level protections in the country this year. Can you walk us through? Walk us through what is not law, or what is now law, and what it changes for day-to-day Vermonters.
Who wants? Dara, you want to talk first?
Oops, sorry.
I don't know of all the effective dates, but I do know that there is the potential for a constitutional challenge, so it's not all completely a done deal in terms of some of the protections that we passed. I think particularly the constitutional right to sue a federal agent who breaches your rights. Like that, we could have some issues with enforcing that, but for now,
Same with masking.
Yeah, and then the masking, that didn't happen.
No. But that's
the problem with
it's
bringing it back next year.
Can you explain the procedural move that was used to block that?
I actually missed out because I had a family issue.
Yeah.
Theresa's got this one.
Sure. So there was a lot of back and forth with the Senate on 208, and it was late coming out, and it was it also, although we knew, I mean, both of the chairs of the judiciary committees, both in the Senate and the House, knew what was happening with the bill. There was a difference of opinion and fact in terms of interpretation between the House and the Senate about what might be considered constitutional and what might not be considered constitutional. And that was essentially around what we could or could not do in terms of federal agents, and how we might be able to govern at the state level what federal agents did in our state. So the Senate felt like they were willing to take that chance and go for it. The House Judiciary Committee took a different stance on that. And so in the House, we took that provision out and we focused on state level law enforcement. It went to a conference committee, came back, literally a conference committee like in the last 3 days of the session. It came back to the House, and the procedural move was at the very end of the session, we often see a motion from the minority party to essentially allow something to come up off from the notice calendar and to be considered. And you're waiving certain rules. In order to do that, I can't remember if it's 2/3 or 3/4 vote, 2/3. And unless the minority party will go along with you on doing that, and most often they do. You know, they will have talked with their members, and they will most often enable that to happen. They said no on this. And so we still tried to do it because there was such strong desires to vote on this with the Democratic and Progressive and Independent caucuses. But we failed to get the number of 2/3 vote that you needed to suspend rules. So what you're doing is suspending the rules that normally require something to sit on the notice calendar for 1 day before it can be brought to the floor. So when you have an adjournment date, you know, your time is running short. And so the minority party failed to allow a suspension of rules. And so we had a motion by the majority party to suspend rules, and we had a roll call vote on it, and it actually didn't fail by a lot, but it did fail. It got struck down along party lines, essentially. So we were not able to bring that up off the notice calendar, and so it's dead for now, but I'm sure we'll see it back next legislative session.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the room with respect to civil rights and immigration protections? Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or can we move on? All right, so I'm going to move on to housing. S328 and H775 give you municipalities and the state new financial tools to spur housing. Authority for towns to issue revenue bonds backed by special assessments, an expanded treasurer credit facility for mobile home infrastructure, and off-site modular construction, broader VITA financing for certain multi-unit developments, and new municipal housing planning requirements. H757 streamlines the transfer of manufactured homes, ensures that they're treated like other housing under local zoning, and supports limited equity cooperatives that keep housing affordable. So what in this year's housing package could actually move the needle on getting units built in towns like ours, and how soon will we see it?
So you may or may not like the answer to this question, but the biggest barrier that we are seeing for housing development is NIMBYism. That is the biggest barrier that we are seeing. There was just an article in today's news about a community that said, "Oh, not in our backyard," and the local authorities went. I'll give them credit. They went ahead anyways. They said yes. They issued whatever the permit or whatever the situation was. But that honestly is one of the biggest barriers that we are seeing. That is the thing that when we see developers say, you know, whatever permit process that they have to go through takes a long time, it is because of the protracted negotiations and procedures that happen when somebody finds out that you know, somebody wants to build you know, a 4-unit apartment house or a 6-unit house, or I can use Waterbury as an example. You know, we right on Main Street, after the flooding, our town office is flooded, and it's taken 15 years, but we just had the ribbon cutting at a 26-unit housing project right on Main Street. a lot of people didn't want to see that happen. Well, it turns out more people wanted to see it happen, and those folks came and voted and spoke, and it was overwhelmingly approved and moved through the process. But that honestly is the biggest barrier, and things that we don't have any control of in this state, which is inflation, and the cost of materials has risen exponentially since COVID. And we need to see some of those things go down, and right now with all the tariffs in place, that is just not happening. I think we passed the Home Act a couple of years ago, and I know that people heard in the news Act 181, that there was a lot of repeal efforts about 181. Well, the aspects that people didn't pay a whole lot of attention to, but that was a relaxing of permitting requirements to enable more housing to be built. That really wasn't the focus, and there were certain elements of 181 that we reacted and responded to that people found objectionable, but they lacked the focus on what 181 was really about, which was also about how to relieve some of the more onerous permitting requirements for a period of time to enable some of the housing to get built. So,
Theresa, I'd love to sort of just move into that, if that's okay with you. And so let me just catch the audience up. In 2024, Act 181 modernized Act 250, Vermont's land use law. It created a professional land use review board, started a process for regional future land use maps, and added a road rule that would trigger Act 250 review and set up Tier 3 protections for critical working lands and natural resources. This spring, rural landowners organized against the added permitting scrutiny, and lawmakers reversed course. So S325 repeals the road rule and the Tier 3 and opens a new public engagement process to decide how best to protect working lands and natural resources. Act 181 was a major 2024 reform, and S325 walks back two key pieces of it. So can you tell us what changed, what it means for rural landowners, and remind us what Act 181, as you just were, was getting at?
Thank you. I'll start and then pass it along. The Act 181, as you said, was the Act 250 is now like 52 years old, and there had not been any sort of major overhaul, major review. There was a years-long process, community-driven process that went into public input about what changes could or should or shouldn't be made to Act 250, and that culminated in the passage of Act 181. So Act 181 was about housing, it was about the environment, it was about flood resiliency, it was about climate, it was about protecting resources, our natural resources, and rural landowners. And it wasn't only rural landowners, I want to say. We heard from the real estate community, we heard from some municipalities, so it was more widespread. I think if you are on Facebook at all or in some of the social media, there was kind of this, it got very nasty, actually. Facebook group that I know that people know social media, but a lot of those people weren't actually people. And I think it's really important for people to judge that. I just had to throw that out there because, I think that it's important to know that it was about housing, it was about protecting the environment, it was about flood resiliency, it was about taking a bona fide look at something that had been on the books for 50 years and needed to have a modernization. The public had an outcry about those two particular things. Some people wanted to repeal the whole thing, and they want to repeal Act 250 altogether. I'll just, news break, that's not going to happen. So we did, the Senate sent over a bill that essentially put a pause on it, and the House went a little bit further and said, we are going to repeal the Tier 3, and we're going to repeal the so-called road rule, that roads of certain distance would have to go through trigger Act 250. So, that's what happened this year. That was signed into law.
Thank you. Yeah. I think we have a couple of questions. Freddie, please.
Freddie Graves again from Fayston. I'm part of that group, and there was nobody that was nasty. If you look at the Sergeant of Arms, and they said that there was none of that.
They might
It
not
was
have been-
proven.
Can you ask
So-
your question, Freddie, please?
Yeah. So there were no stakeholders that were working lands people. It was all NGOs that commented on this and helped develop this law. The original intentions were laudable, but the implementation was a failure. And that's why people were upset. Right?
With the repeals that have occurred, has there been some repair in your mind as far
I
as the
think there's some
implementation?
repair, but if you look at Act 121 and Act 59, coming after the land too. I think if you look at all of that joined together, the rural people are in real trouble. And you guys failed to listen until people got angry.
I think that's fair in terms of making sure that people feel like they have a voice, and I think that people use those voices. I wasn't part of that planning process. I don't know who all was. I know that, as you said, the advocates and those non-governmental agencies who feel like they have a stake in land use and environment were probably the loudest voices during that year-long process. I don't dispute that. I do have to take issue with the fact that there were some very negative and very disturbing comments on that Facebook page. I read them myself. There were threats made against people. I had erroneous information posted about me, saying I didn't vote for that, and
There was a
things like
second
that.
group that was started by a bot, but the original group that has 16,000 people that are Vermonters were not involved in that. So
that
don't characterize this group that way because you were mistaken.
I would like to add that one of our constituents actually posted on that Facebook page that encouraging people on the group to come to legislators' houses and demonstrate in front of their houses. And I find that to be beyond what is acceptable. And thankfully, the other people on the group discouraged it and said it was a bad idea. But it was a little worrisome.
Well, I think that's a reminder that we need to maintain civility, and I want to give Dara a chance to speak, and I also want to reflect back to what she said at the beginning, which was that this was a year in which she really experienced what democracy means, with people standing up and making their voice heard. And if we do that in a civil way, hopefully not picketing outside of people's houses, we can make meaningful change, and that's really important. Dara, please.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I also had a personal experience of feeling like I took time to speak with a constituent who I actually admired and found that I was misrepresented on that Facebook group. And I don't know if it was just using the telephone, that there was some miscommunication, but it was startling to be targeted like that, and I feel like I can't even have a productive conversation now because I feel angry about it. I have really strong concerns about small communities. That is what rural Vermont is, right? Our farms, our working lands are in small towns like ours. And just like we've been talking about today, education and healthcare are existential threats for small places that don't have scale. So I understand why, on top of all that, we had a real crisis of confidence and fear about our lands and our ability to have viable businesses in our small communities. And I believe that we did have a fail of implementation. One of the big parts of Act 181 was to have a professional land use review board for Act 250. And we created that professional board so that it could do its job better and more consistently around the state. But we tasked it with doing a really hard thing, which was to look at our most sensitive ecological areas and say what they are, where they are, and that those specific areas require a higher level of regulation because they're so fragile and so special. You would think that the Agency of Natural Resources would be the natural person to do that, the natural agency to do that, but they didn't want to because probably it's a hot potato, it's difficult, but it needs to be science informed. And so that job was punted to this newly formed board that just didn't have their legs under them. And so I got panicked calls from my planning commissioners who were like, hey, the whole valley is almost is almost tier 3. Like, what does this mean? So it was a poor rollout. I apologize that people got scared. Nobody wants to take people's land away or their ability to develop it. We want to have the tools in place so that people who are fortunate enough to own land can do so, develop it in the best way, and that they can access resources to do that at an affordable cost. So, I mean, that's the goal. We're just not there yet.
Thank you. Ben?
Just a couple comments. You said there was a lot of community involvement. I don't see that a lot of people knew that this Act 181 was already passed as law 2 years ago, and many of us had not heard a word about it. So for one thing, I would like more transparency from our government. I would also like to have legislation from the bottom up rather than the top down. And that's what I see happening here. And a lot of people employed in the state of Vermont, A&R, blah, 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 have been the ones pushing this on to rural Vermont. 20 years ago, there were very few trees in here. Now I hear A&R talking about a farm as being a fracturing of our block. You know, come on. We've lost our logging, we're killing our farming. What is the state, how do you talk about affordable housing when all our mills are shut down? We send all our wood to Canada to get processed. These are things we have to change. These are things that rural Vermont stands for. This environment that we all are trying to protect looks this way because of the people who've been protecting it for eons. I've been in land use since it was created. That is conservation, whether you agree or not. We have to have plans, we have to follow them. That's a devaluation of our land to do what the state wants done, conserved, done for logging, farming. So when you don't, because it's not permanently conserved, and you don't count it as conserved, I've got a problem with that. I've been conserving my land an environmentally way for over 40 years. And I would hope that the people who are legislating can take a look at eons of people here, generations, who have given you the environment you're trying to control.
Thank you. Can we give the representatives a moment to respond to that one, please?
Thank you. I just perhaps everyone knows this, but Act 181, which was passed in 2024, looked at the state and broke it into different tiers. Tier 1A and 1B was like more urban areas where we see opportunity for growth, and allowing it, and once those are designated, allowing those areas to move forward with limited development without having to go through the Act 250 process. And that was to spur housing in the state of Vermont, which we greatly need. And that is working, as Representative Wood says, in certain areas. So that's critical to not dismantle that. The Tier 3, which was very loosely the rural areas and requiring more scrutiny, as Representative Torre said, that was not thought out as well as it should have, and that was repealed in S325. And you know, I do think that the two of us had a good, productive conversation here at the Big Picture with a number of rural landowners in our district, and that was certainly helpful to us in advocating for our votes on S325. So, you know, I think when we can have a productive conversation where we're not, you know, yelled at for doing something, when we understand concerns, it helps us, you know, work on your behalf. So I just want to say there's some good parts of this bill, there were some bad parts of it, and those parts are being changed. And I think we hear you loud and clear that the public process was not perceived as a public process for the farmers and the rural landowners, and that is being redone. So thank you for that, you know, for speaking up.
Thank you, Candice. Yes, please.
Yeah, hi, Ben Falk, Moortown. I think this is a really odd moment because I'm like a Democrat voter my whole life, but now we've got, and many of us are, who are part of the group that's had to be activated because of 181, and we saw the maps and we saw the most gentrifying bill ever to come down the pike definitely in Vermont, and a bill that was, you know, first of all, passed, as Ben said, without any of us knowing it. No one was involved with that. No one was at the table. And now it's being framed as a perception issue. Like, you guys need to do differently to help us perceive that we're being heard, but we actually weren't even at the table. And so it's this odd moment when rural Vermont finally started paying attention. We said, this is crazy. You're gonna tank even more smallholders of land, homesteaders, never mind small farmers, loggers, everyone else who's already mostly gone out of business in this state. And now people who supported this bill voted against it. So I have a few questions. I mean, Dara, you voted for 181 in 2024 under the 687 or whatever it was under, but now voted against the repeal of huge portions of it. How does that, for S325, which you voted for, which repealed Tier 3, if you need a reminder, that's Tier 3 and that's the road rule. So the two huge pieces, because it looked like you said you shook your head like you didn't vote against it, but that's voting against a huge piece of 181. That's what everyone is upset about. How are we supposed to perceive that, voting against something that you supported just 2 years earlier?
Because it was poorly implemented, and how would I know that when I voted for it? It was also a portion of a really big bill. Tier 3 and the road rule were not that huge a piece. I mean, it was, I think, a 120-page bill. I mean, a lot of stuff. Regional planning, designation program, Act 250 modernization. And there used to be a road rule in Act 250. So they brought it back after, the spaghetti lots of the past led to a really poor outcome for development. The idea behind the change to the road rule made sense to me because I live in a community where I see a wealthy landowner come into town and build a massive driveway and take down a bunch of trees for their view and then have serious runoff problems that affect our town roads. And roads matter in small communities, and as you know, because I know you understand land and how water moves on it, having long access roads to homes in the climate and in the landscape we live in can be a bad thing. It depends on a lot of factors. So I thought the road rule sounded like a good idea. Tier 3 I had concerns about because, like I said, it seemed like a hot potato. It wasn't clear who was going to actually do that hard work. And I had hoped that our planning commissions, I think we expected a little more from our planning commissions and our regional planning commissions in terms of the outreach. I thought it was going to be more of a visioning exercise for how do we want to grow in our community. And I tried and advocated in my committee for funds to make it a vision exercise in our communities. Several of us did. From smaller communities, and we were shot down. Funding even that year was difficult to come by. So I'm not terribly surprised and that something this ambitious would have some pretty serious hiccups. And I have full confidence that this community that we live in, that understands conservation, understands natural resources, has so many successes, that if any community can have a really civil, generative conversation, it's this one. And I'm hoping that we will hold such a conversation this fall, and that we can revisit it and give it the justice it needs in a longer setting.
Well, thanks.
I think there's
so I can appreciate that you.
Can I just step in for 1 second here, please? There's a real. I think you hit on something really important. You just asked a question that was, how are we supposed to understand you changing your mind about a bill that you previously voted for and you're now voting against? And as someone who participates in representative democracy, I think that's a beautiful thing. And I understand that it can make us question one's ability to make a decision, but I think it's so valuable to think about how your representative said, I hear you, and I am willing to change my mind. And I just want to celebrate that little tiny thing inside what is a really challenging moment.
Absolutely, and I hear that, and I'm hearing that, all day long in the last few weeks from VNRC and everyone else. Like, yeah, great, it got the conversation going. So you didn't. The bill wasn't very clear. It was just kind of an idea, and the road rule was a nice idea, but then the rollout was not what you thought it would be. I mean, a bill is made based on how it will be implemented. That's what brings the meaning to it. So like Tier 3 brought meaning to that law. Without those Tier 3 maps, the maps that the LURB that Alex Weinhagen helped produce, the law didn't mean anything. So you guys voted for something that had it could have no meaning because those maps brought the law meaning. And then you changed your mind, and I appreciate that. But I have a hard time believing that you did that because of listening for two reasons. One, you voted against the second Byrd Amendment, which is the accessory on farm bill. For people who don't know about the two Byrd Amendments, Byrd, a farmer orchardist from Cabot, proposed, and they both passed, but the second one narrowly passed, and despite 20 Democrats voting for it, Representatives Torre and Candice White voted against it because of concerns about noise and potential issues which are not maybe in evidence in the state, never mind definitely not at crisis levels like lack of rural viability, including small farms and smallholders and homesteaders. That's one reason, but the other reason is no one's against long roads more than me. I do land planning and have for 25 years for a living. I'm always discouraging landowners from making long roadways. We don't need more conveyances to flood our towns, for sure. But the road rule didn't make any of those illegal in 2024. It just made it so wealthy people can do it, and everyone who can't afford Act 250 couldn't. So this state is becoming a second, third, fourth homeowner, Teton Valley, Nantucket type of place. Those aren't big line items for people like your neighbor. He'll just go through Act 250. The South Tower up a 5,200 foot road down to Rochester, no problem. Act 250 is a 1% line item. So none of that was made illegal. That's why, as me, I'm a hardcore environmentalist. I would support that if it made a 2,000 foot driveway potentially illegal for a corporation putting up a cell phone tower on top of a 40% grade.
So it sounds
but it didn't do that. It just made it pay to play. It was just a gentrification bill under the guise of environment.
I want to pull out what I think you're saying here is that road rule was relying on a fee structure that benefits those who can afford it and disadvantages those who cannot. And if we're going to continue to enact environmental protections that only negatively affect those of us who genuinely live here and are trying to afford to live here, we're not necessarily achieving something. Is that right? And
you're achieving a further gentrified state.
So I'm just trying to coalesce what you're saying into something that our representatives can respond to so that we can have some other questions come to.
Sure. Well, tens of thousands of us got to see what was intended here because it's obviously a gentrifying process that was at work here. None of this was made illegal. None of the bad land impacts were made illegal by 181.
Maybe they should respond to that.
Sure. Well, that and how in what universe is there a reason to vote against the accessory farm amendment, the Byrd Amendment, because of noise or some potential issues I've asked Representative White, and we've had a good email exchange, but I'm not getting any evidence of that being some big problem when all of us can see the problem of viability and affordability in rural Vermont, which includes homesteads, farmsteads, landowners of all sorts. Where is the evidence of that potential
That's good.
problem?
Let's let them answer. Thank you very much.
So
We'll pass the mic.
then again, the second Byrd Amendment, which was an amendment to S 325, I voted against, and I voted against it because the Environment Committee had spent the previous month taking testimony on Tier 3 in the road rule, which were clear that we needed to make some decisions on those pieces of Act 181. And the Byrd Amendment was a floor amendment that the committee had not had any time to take any testimony on, and it was basically allowing any farm to have any kind of event without any Act 250 permitting, there are a lot of towns that don't have zoning, and it felt like, to me, it felt like this is a big topic that requires some testimony in committee to understand what exactly this is doing for the whole state of Vermont. The amendment
The farmers have been
passed.
fighting for that for 15 years, that exact
Pardon me,
language.
I'm a brand new, I've been in my position for 2 years and I did not have that history, and I am not a land use expert, and I often rely on the expertise of the committees to take the deep dive into some of these issues, because as you can see, often legislation can have unintended consequences, and the goal of the committees is to look at a particular issue from all angles and hear all sides to make an informed decision. So I didn't feel like there was the time hadn't been taken, and I didn't feel comfortable supporting that.
Well, that's because
So,
Democrats have
I'm
kicked
sorry,
that can
we
for that
have-
for 15 years.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, we have 5 minutes left to our allotted time.
Uh-huh.
So we do need to move on. I think Candice
Okay.
is saying that she didn't feel comfortable voting for it because she didn't have enough information. That's what I'm hearing. And that she wanted to give it more thought. And I think you two should probably continue this conversation at another time.
Yeah, I think-
Is that okay?
Yeah, well, it's
Can
a
we
total
move
fail
along?
because
Please
there's
move on.
there's no problem in evidence that was brought up as a reason to not support something that people have been working on for 15 years, relieving Act 250 burdens from small farmers.
I just don't think that we're going to solve this
I
problem right
understand,
now.
but-
And you have valuable things to say, and that should continue at another time.
Just
Yes, please.
A total
There is
failure
an
of
unwritten rule
representation.
in the Senate, I assume in
So we
the
have a bit of a
House,
procedural explanation here if anyone's
that
interested in listening.
You do not vote for it's called a floor amendment. Somebody stands up and they make an amendment that has not been through the committee process, because without that process, you may think it's the best thing since sliced bread, but until the committee sits and looks at it and takes it apart, it is very dangerous to just start passing amendments because they sound good on the floor. And most freshmen do it, and most freshmen learn very quickly that it doesn't work that way. I've seen the legalization of marijuana, I've seen the bottle bill, I've seen more than one thing which, once it went through the process, gets voted for. But
The process is important. The process. Okay. Jeff, please.
Hi, I'm Jeff Sholkoff. I'm the chair of the Warren Development Review Board. Had a long history on the board and have a little bit of a different perspective. I have 3 things. I guess I'll try to be really brief because I know time's brief. One is that I don't think it was a top-down, the original one. I've watched this as a process for 10 years. There were many volunteer committees. There were many planning commissions, many town plans considered. And I believe that Act 181, for all its faults, I would agree with a lot of the faults, was not issued top-down. It was built from a broad base, long time, well advertised to people who pay attention to the planning. It might be a surprise to people who missed that.
I'm on the planning commission in Facein.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Yeah. So I
There's no
saw it develop. I
information
had friends that
coming from the state.
participated. We were asked as DRB members to participate in revisions to Act 250, it went on for 5 or 10 years. Of course it did. It was finally adopted. It took actually a long time. The second thing I'd say is I would agree with Dara 100%. In Warren, most of the easy-to-develop land has been developed. And so increasingly, we get most conflicted with wealthy out-of-state owners buying remote pieces of property and fragmenting our forest and fragmenting our ecosystems in order to have one house. And it's generally not people who participate in the community. It's, I think it's a problem. I totally agree with the impact on rural Vermont and farms, and that we need to do something about it. And I'd say 3 would be, now that it's broken apart and this conversation has evolved like this, I think it's a great time for the local planning commissions and the town plans, and work it up from the local level and not just hit the state with everything.
Except they're trying to take over the whole planning.
I understand. I think it's a perfect time for the planning commissions to become activists, and for the conservation commissions to become activists, and the farmers to become activists. That's a really good thing. I'm just supporting that.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think we need to work it, but now that it's kind of blown up, that seems like it makes it right for refining these decisions and making good policy.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Do you want to respond?
I have one thing.
Just about the house high up in the forest that a wealthy person can afford to develop. That house right now is not going to trigger Act 250 because it's only one house. Do you see? So that was the goal behind Tier 3, was to say high places of ecological value should trigger Act 250 because they are hard to develop correctly. So that was a really important piece. So we don't have, now that we've repealed it, that risk is still there in all of our communities until we get back to it.
Well, I think what we've heard is that can that be addressed in a way that isn't just financial? Right? Because if the only burden is going through Act 250 and you can afford to do that, because, you say Act 250 and those of us in development, we run. It is scary and it is a long process. And so is there a way to develop those kinds of protections so that they're evenly enforced and not just advantaging that for the wealthy?
That's a huge takeaway for me. And we did have a bill in 2024 that was going to help lower income landowners have access to support so that they could go through Act 250, get the technical assistance that it provides, but at a price point that works.
Thank you. One more question, and if we can, please try and keep it brief. We have one more topic to cover, please.
Wendy Bridgewater, Facein. And the problem that I see, I agree with a lot of what's been said, is that the regulatory teeth were pulled with Tier 3 and Tier 2, but the underlying framework still remains. And Act 59 is part of that. And you both, Dara and Candice, you both voted against age 70, which would have made the current use or use value of appraisal land count as conserved. And if you look at it, only something like 0.02% of current use land is removed every year. 44% of Vermont is in current use. And 27% of the land is state land that's already conserved. So if you combine those, we've already met the 50 by 50 goal of Act 59. And if you don't vote to accept current use as part of the conserved land, then Act 59 should be repealed, in my opinion.
Thank you, Wendy.
So I just want to clarify that current use actually will be considered part of conserved land, and that's one of the pieces of misinformation that's out there that says that it's not. It actually will be considered part of conserved land.
On what website of the states can we see that documentation?
I can actually share a document that we received I have to remember exactly where it came through the committee process. The committee asked for it. We all received it as legislators. I just can't remember all the details of it, but because that was a question that was asked a lot.
So can Freddie follow up with you, maybe via email?
And I have another, you might even be able to remember this one. So Act 59, just to clarify, all Act 59 did was create a planning process and a report to look at, here are some lofty conservation goals, whatever they are. It did define 30 by 30 and 50 by 50. But it's saying what do we need to achieve our conservation goals? And so that's what's been happening over the last year and a half. And that report is going to be written this fall. So I feel like let's let the report come out, and then let's have our community conversation about it. And I think that we've all learned a lot since that bill, and we have a lot of things to consider. So all it was a plan, and the plan is almost written.
Okay. Okay, yes, please, Liz. It's on.
Okay. Oh, wait, sorry, I forgot the website. So if you go to VermontConservationPlan.com, you'll find the whole planning process, and it should include the current use discussion that came up in that planning process.
One more time, Dara, what is that?
VermontConservationPlan.com.
Liz, please.
I just want to remind everybody, as usual, that our elected officials work for almost nothing. They work for 5 days a week with other jobs that they have during the session. It is an incredible amount of work. They have to learn about many, many bills. They do rely on the committees to vet things, and these motions are really difficult. With that said, I think what everyone in this room, thank God for everybody here, because you're paying attention, and I really wish everybody else would. But so I feel really grateful for the people that are in here. I think it should be a little more gentle on our people, because not, part of me wants to say, if you have an issue, run. But I just think that this is a great experience. I just don't like when people sort of attack people that are really trying their best. That's all.
Thank you, Liz. You can leave it on. It's always on. I'm going to move on to our last topic, which is transportation. And I understand that we've gone over. If you need to leave, please do. Are we okay to continue on to the next topic, though? Okay. And thank you all. If you are leaving, for coming. Go eat some dinner. Okay, road and bridge costs are up about 60% in 5 years, while gas tax revenue keeps falling. Lawmakers added an annual inflation adjuster to town highway funding, put in $3 million of one-time surplus, and created a new local option transportation fund. A mileage-based user fee for EVs is planned to launch in 2027 and paid at annual inspection. Federal NEVI, or are we saying NEVI? How do we? NEVI grants are adding level 3 EV chargers around the state. To stabilize an almost $1 billion budget, the Agency of Transportation cut 62 positions this year. Everyone in this room drives these roads. Between the EV mileage fee coming in 2027 and the squeeze on the highway budget, what should people expect?
Well, thank you for summarizing some of the work we did in the Transportation Committee. This year, some of the changes, so coming out of last year, 2026 fiscal year, the transportation budget was such that we paved, I want to say 125 miles of pavement in a year. Which is significantly less than the goal of the Transportation Agency. So this year, one of the changes we made was looking at the transportation revenue coming in, and I think we talked about this earlier, a third of the purchase and use tax that comes into transportation goes back into the education fund. And that equals about $50 million a year. We are starting to pull back the money that's going into the education fund to keep it in transportation, to try to continue to stabilize the transportation budget. And so we're pulling $10 million back from that education donation in fiscal year 2027, and that $10 million will be leveraged to get a 90%, it's 80 or 90% federal match, and that money will all go to paving roads. Now, a lot of our transportation budget is really focused on highways. A much lesser percentage goes back to the towns to help towns pay for local bridges and roads. But we were able to increase the money that's going back to municipalities in the next budget by taking that $3 million of one-time funds, and by this new transportation fund, which Devin spoke of, that will be funded by the local option taxes. So Waitsfield joined a number of other towns this year in voting through a local option tax. I want to say 13 other towns did the same thing this town meeting. So, and all that money goes, well, I want to say 75 or 80% stays with the town.
75.
Okay, 25% goes back to the state. That money goes into the pilot fund to reimburse municipalities if they're hosting like government buildings or jails or something that they're not getting tax revenue for. They get a portion of this pilot fund to try to help make them whole. The pilot will have had an excess this year and will have more of an excess as we go forward with more towns coming online. So a portion of that excess in the pilot will go into this special fund, which will then get redistributed back to municipalities it's a formula. It goes to all municipalities, whether or not they have a local option tax or not. But that also, so, pieces here, pieces there to help support municipalities who are also, trying to deal with roads and bridges and having to pay for this, this 60% cost increase that we've seen over the last 5 years.
Yes, Candice, thank you. I just have one follow-up question there, which is, if you're pulling funding that is otherwise usually given to the education fund to fund the transportation authority, how are we making up the gap in the education fund?
I think that's for Senator Cummings.
That is for me. That was one of the biggest, the chair of transportation and I have decided we still love each other, but he's on my bad list. We know that the transportation fund is in rough shape, because coming over here, my car got 41 miles to the gallon. So I'm not putting that much gas tax in there.
Talk into the mic.
And eventually we will go to a usage tax for everyone is the plan. So if you're driving a big SUV that gets 25 miles to a gallon, you're covering your cost. I'm probably, if I don't drive a lot, owe you something. But before education gets accused of stealing from the transportation fund, one of the things of having been there for a while is you have some history. When Act 60, the original education fund, was passed, the gas tax was increased to help pay that cost. And I wasn't involved, but I believe it was a penny. But it was increased. As the years went by, I don't know if it was AOT or the tax department, but they came in and they said, look, this is just difficult, all the other gas tax goes. And so there was a trade-off. Purchase and use is a sales tax. By and large, it's a sales tax on cars. But if you buy a washing machine in New Hampshire, you're supposed to check that little blurb and declare that, and you owe the purchase and use tax on it. So at some point, it was said, okay, the purchase and use tax, or X% of the purchase and use tax, is the same amount of money as the gas tax, and so we'll switch it. And so they got switched, and the purchase and use went in to the education fund. But the extra money from gas tax went to transportation. It wasn't theft. The governor's proposal this year was to remove the purchase and use tax over 5 years from the education fund at the rate of additional $10 million a year, up to $50 million. That's a couple cents on your property tax. And this year, though, he said, we've got the surplus in the general fund, and so we'll take the purchase and use and we'll give Ed $10 million. The Ways and Means Committee sent us a bill which made adjustments to the federal tax changes in HR 1 or the Big Beautiful Bill, whatever you want to call it, which this time dealt primarily with business taxes. And they coupled and decoupled and recoupled. I've called it a fairly incestuous bill, and only a tax accountant could really understand what they did. But they made adjustments so that Vermont didn't lose any revenue. And not only did we not lose it because of the federal changes, we made $10 million. And so the solution that they sent was that we would decrease the percent of purchase and use by 10 million. We would increase the percent of the sales tax, which is the primary non-property tax source of revenue. No, it's rooms and meals. We get all of sales. We would increase the rooms and meals tax by the same amount. And then because we raised 10 million extra dollars, the general fund was held whole. The end result is transportation got 10 million in perpetuity as long as people keep buying cars, and everybody else was held whole. But they wanted to keep taking so that next year they'd take 20 million and the year after it would be 30, all the way up to $50 million. Your finance committee, and in the end the Senate said, no, we can't, this is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and we have no way of backfilling $50 million into the education fund. This is base money. So as it stands, the 10 million is in transportation forever, as long as the tax revenue's coming in, but that percentage. Education is held whole, and the general fund is held whole. In the committee of conference, we made another adjustment to make the governor happy. And committee of conference is when the House has got a bill, the Senate's got a bill. We don't agree, so we all get together, and there's 3 from each side, and we sit across from the table and we reach agreement, or the bills fail. Committee of conference upped the purchase and use, replaced it in ed with rooms and meals, and next year there will be a $10 million hole, but there'll be 20 million going to transportation. What will happen next year in the general fund, I don't know. And all of this is based on the assumption that people will keep purchasing things at the same level and still going out and eating and drinking at the same level. If the economy tanks, all bets are off.
Okay, Ben, yes, please.
This is a question about transportation. Maybe I have my figures wrong. I hear that we need to pave at least 300 miles a year to even stay even. How many miles are we paving this year? I heard an estimate like 59 miles. How many are we actually paving?
Someone told me that number today, and I strongly disputed it. And I said I will find out what the miles are that we are planning on paving. But my memory is that we paved 125 miles last year. The agency's goal is closer to 300, whether it's the agency or the pavers, but there's a goal of 300, which my assessment was that that's a little lofty. But anyway, I believe it's between 125 and 300. I will find that number for you. I don't know that today.
But those are the numbers that the Chair of Transportation in the Senate was telling us when he was telling us he needed $50 million.
The 300?
No, we usually do, I thought it was 200, or we should, in order to keep up with the need. And this year, we were going to be able to do 50, but I think that was on the budget before we put money in, and that doesn't include the interstate, which is a different, these are state roads.
Thank you. Okay, yes, please, Shannon.
Shannon from Warren, and my question is about climate planning and what VTrans is doing that, because clearly we keep paving and patching the same roads throughout Vermont. I'm just curious what you're doing, forecasting for that, and what your plans are. I haven't really heard much on that.
You know, from the agencies, or from our committee perspective, I don't hear, I mean, in terms of how the agency is planning for climate change. I mean, I think that's how they are when they're looking at replacing a culvert, upsizing it, things like that. You know, we have the flooding that we've had in the last 10 or 15 years. We've actually benefited from in one way, which is that, you know, FEMA has paid for a lot of our repair, our culvert replacements, a lot of our bridge replacements, particularly for rail. A lot of those have been covered with FEMA funds because of the flooding. And that's not really planning, that's just, you know, how it worked out. But I wouldn't say the agency seems to have like a plan for climate change, you know, for climate resiliency, other than making better choices about the sizing of culverts and so forth. I mean, looking at different types of materials for paving is something they continue to do. That's about all I can offer on that.
I heard Moncton is closing a road because it's just not really viable for what the climate is.
So that's towns throwing up roads, and that is happening because municipalities cannot afford to pave their roads and their bridges. So that kind of spools into the conversation about trying to get more money to municipalities so they don't have to throw up roads, which means they're basically not going to manage them anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it's only about paving either. There are some roads, like there's one in Granville that was never rebuilt after Irene because it's just too, it's akin to flood zones, right? Like sometimes we just need to stop rebuilding there. And I think that's what Shannon was sort of maybe getting at. It's like, what is the agency thinking about, are all of these roads viable? And should we be changing networks?
I don't know if there is a plan for that, but thank you for clarifying that. But yeah.
Yeah, Brook Road and Plainfield is.
Right, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And the swamp. All right, well, we are beyond our time. We didn't get to talk about a lot of things, including, you know, data centers and cell tower siting, solar and net metering, and data privacy. I think all of this, our representatives are available via email. Please don't hesitate to take one of the summary sheets that Dara and Candice brought. And it's really important that we participate. Speak up and reach out to your representatives. And thank you all so much for being here. Thank you guys, gals, for making yourselves available. Good. Good night.